In the first episode, we looked at how Israel's arms and surveillance industry uses its occupation of Palestine as a laboratory to test products it then sells around the world. In this episode, I'm visiting some of those customers to see what exactly gets exported. Is it just weapons and technology, or something more profound? We're in Tucson, Arizona, and it is searingly hot. And I can smell the freedom here. But that much vaunted freedom needs regular enforcement, especially as we're right on the border with Mexico. Since 2021, more than 6 million refugees and migrants have been detained crossing into the USA overland, driven by collapsing economies, violence and climate change. One thing that's really clear is that what Israel's been doing for decades in Palestine is very attractive to people who are trying to secure the US-Mexico border. So the technology and the companies who are operating in Palestine are often appearing in other countries around the world, including right here on the US-Mexico border. But first, to understand what it means to cross the border here, I'm heading into the desert to meet Joel Smith. He describes the challenges facing the migrants.
The object is to get to the Tucson area and get out of here, get out of the desert itself. So what they have a choice of now is going across the mountains to avoid Border Patrol. They don't like the inaccessible areas you can't get to without a vehicle.
The US-Mexico crossing is the deadliest land route for refugees in the world, with over 600 deaths recorded in 2022. And the more remote the route, the more dangerous it is. How's it look?
A little bit dirty. Usually they come from places where they really don't understand deserts.
Right.
They think there's going to be a stream. They think there's going to be a creek somewhere they can get water from. There's absolutely nothing here.
Right.
But people aren't dying of starvation out here. They're dying of thirst.
And what forces people to take these precarious routes, of course, is the famous wall along the border with Mexico.
In Tucson, Arizona, illegal traffic dropped 92%. If you really want to find out how effective a wall is, just ask Israel.
This section predates President Trump, but under his first administration, Israeli firm Elta was paid $500,000 to come up with prototypes for his dream of a coast-to-coast wall. What we see here is the physical fence. We don't see huge amounts of surveillance technology, but we know it's here. There are various parts of this border which use Israeli-made Elbit surveillance towers. And now we're going to look for those surveillance towers, and we're going to speak to one of the world's experts about it. Todd Miller is a journalist who's been studying the US-Mexico border for over 15 years. He's taking me to see one of the 55 Israeli Elbit surveillance towers dotted across this landscape.
They're actually working together,
yes.
And that's why they call this the virtual wall.
Right.
These towers are equipped with night vision cameras that could see at least 7.5 miles away. Regular cameras, thermal energy cameras, and a ground sweeping radar system that supposedly has a 13-mile radius. Probably we're standing on underground motion sensors, so if you are walking and you step on one, it sends off a beeping sound in like the command and control center where they're watching the video feeds. Then they're able to zoom in, like say they see somebody walking on the hill.
Or us.
Or us.
Or us standing
They might
there.
be zooming in right on us at this very
Exactly.
moment.
On one visit here, a Border Patrol agent boasted to him that just seeing the towers on the hill forced migrants to take more remote routes.
And then he said, well, then we go to what is a choke point, and we intercept the people when they come through the choke point. There's a correlation between people dying and these towers that work in tandem with the actual border wall.
I'm with the San Diego Sheriff's Department. I'm the Homeland Security Director for the state of Alabama.
American law enforcement has been turning to Israel for training and equipment since 9/11.
What is happening this evening is a compelling chapter in the war on terror. Tonight's meeting is the culmination of a week in which top American law enforcement officials traveled to Israel to meet their counterparts.
And that relationship has boosted sales of Israel's so-called homeland security technology. The Arizona police are among many US forces using the services of Israeli company Cellebrite. This allows them to extract all the data from mobiles in their possession without a password. And the border has been patrolled by a Hermes 450 drone, also made by Elbit Systems. This is the promo created in the bid for the Towers contract. Phrases like securing the world's most challenging borders are how the Israeli companies remind customers that their products might have been tested in Palestine. The tech park at the University of Arizona was keen to get Israeli companies to locate here at the time Elbit was awarded the Tower contract. We are going to meet Bruce Wright, who used to head the Arizona Tech Park. He was a big figure in encouraging Israeli companies to come and work here and train, so we're going to meet him in his gated community. Good to meet you.
Welcome to Tucson. Elbit is a Israeli-based company, but they created a U.S. subsidiary, and they wanted to demonstrate this technology along the U.S.-Mexico border. We jumped on that opportunity because of our knowledge and understanding of Israel and what was happening with that technology in Israel. They were, in some ways, very far ahead of the United States in trying to use technology to manage their problems, whether they be terrorism or border crossings or whatever it might be.
National border security is often challenged by difficult topographic conditions and vast areas of interest.
Since Elbit secured the $200 million Arizona deal, the fixed towers have made it into the current TorchX Borders promo.
Elbit Systems has the technology, know-how, and real-world operational experience.
TorchX is also used by the Israeli army on the border with Gaza.
And coastal protection solutions.
This is Amy Juan and the co-op farm in the Tohono O'odham Nation. As far as the eye can see.
So yeah, we're a pretty special farm.
Because their land crosses the US-Mexico border, they have the surveillance towers across their territory.
It's a loss of privacy, it's a loss of freedom, and if anything, it's not just them keeping an eye on movement across the border, it's them keeping an eye on us. What Border Patrol presence has done was basically make everybody suspect. To go from a people and a place that have basically been left alone for centuries to being an occupied, militarized community, it is very traumatizing.
What's been so clear being here in Arizona is that there is not just a direct connection between what's happening in Palestine and here on the US-Mexico border, in a physical sense, but also an ideological sense. The perception in the US, in some parts, is that Israel has been successful in managing, pushing back Palestinians, and the same thing can be done here. To push people, migrants, in more and more extreme ways, which inevitably leads to more deaths. Mexico is our next destination, so we're heading to the border town of Nogales, which is a major crossing point. We're in the line to cross from the US to Mexico, and we have to turn the camera off, and you can't take guns either, just to keep the authorities happy. Here we are, Mexico City! So loud! This incredible country of 130 million people is renowned for its culture, food and music. But it's almost as well known for its ongoing battles with drug cartels. 430,000 people have been killed since the start of this drug war nearly 2 decades ago. This roundabout in the centre of Mexico City is dedicated to some of the estimated 60,000 people who have been disappeared, often with the collusion of law enforcement. In 2014, there were 43 students who disappeared. 10 years on, there's been no justice, no accountability. It's a huge scandal here. And remarkably, there's actually a real deep connection to Israeli spyware. Eduardo Ibanez has been a regular at this protest encampment for the last 10 years.
Que estos estudiantes estaban haciendo una colecta de autobuses para venir aquí a México a una protesta que le llamamos el 2 de octubre. Y bueno, de repente empezaron a recibir una violencia que no se entendía, en donde eran baleados, donde eran perseguidos.
3 were killed and the remaining 43 were taken into custody by local police. They have not been seen since. Various investigations have revealed the involvement of the army, but failed to locate the bodies of the missing. Led by the families, the movement for justice was seen as a threat by successive governments. And the Israeli spyware Pegasus was deployed on them. We're going to see Centro Pro, a legal firm here in Mexico City, who represented some of the 43 disappeared families, and to find out how they were Pegasused, which appears to be a verb now. In 2016, things were tense as the lawyers contested the government's account of what had happened to the missing, and then their private phone calls were suddenly all over the national media.
I received messages of phone call that I have had with one of the parents of the 43 that was being published in a big newspaper from Mexico.
¿Qué pasó, Mario? ¿Qué dice? Me están amenazando de llegar a los niños por los 200,000.
This phone call with one of the parents was presented in a way that suggested that we were talking about dirty money, and the whole presentation was signed by a drug cartel and so on. When that happened, we were shocked. It was my voice, it was a private phone call. You become afraid of what else can they have of your private life.
Then in 2022, Apple's customer protection system alerted them that they were the subject of a state-sponsored attack.
Nowadays, you have everything on your phone. There is nothing that we can do basically to prevent it. What everybody says is that this technology evolves faster than what we can do, in a small NGO in Mexico City.
At the time of the first attack, no one knew how this had happened or who else might be targeted. Until this man helped identify the spyware.
Hi.
But before we could talk, he wanted to check that my phone wasn't infected.
It will not only compromise you, but everyone who has contacted you. So it's surveillance that goes beyond their main target. What we're going to do is that we are going to see if we can find something.
Pegasus can now get into your phone without the user needing to click a link. It takes control of your camera, your microphone, and broadcasts it to those controlling the software. They can see your location, access your data, and see what's on your screen, including encrypted messaging apps.
Well, it's good.
That's negative.
This phone didn't show signs of the types of infections that we check for, including Pegasus.
How often do you use these tools to check? Are we talking daily?
Yeah, almost.
When the lawyers' phones were first compromised in 2016, Lewis started investigating who was behind it.
This is the first contract to get access to Pegasus, almost $3 million. And it mentions also the number of targets, because normally the number of licenses that this particular client acquired, which were 500, that means that you can spy 500 phones at the same time. During this period, 10,000 or even more people were targeted with Pegasus in Mexico, many of which were journalists, human rights defenders, activists, politicians, government officials themselves.
Another sales document, this one from 2022, revealed the Mexican army was acting in an unconstitutional way.
Heading of the email and the document, it's called Oficios Mortales, or like deadly document, something like that.
Is that supposed to be funny? Or?
I don't know if it's supposed to be funny or it's supposed to indicate that it's very secret. The final user of this director of Military Intelligence Center, this agency was secret, but it was also illegal. They don't have any legal authorization to do surveillance.
Mexico's army is huge, almost a state within a state, and Mexico is the world's biggest user of Pegasus spyware. It's controlled by the Army Intelligence Center, behind Gate 4 of this massive camp. It's totally secretive. There's no way I can actually get in there, have a chat, which would be nice. Love to see the files. Despite the evidence, the army still denies they use Pegasus, and that dynamic gives Israel potential leverage over Pegasus customers.
They could reveal their clients. They have allegedly backups of all the people that have been surveilled. Definitely that gives Israel power over the Mexican position. For example, the Mexican army has no legal basis to acquire or deploy a tool like Pegasus. That definitely plays a role into how belligerent the Mexican government or how outspoken it is on issues like the apartheid or genocide going on in Palestine.
After gaining access to Pegasus in 2011, Mexico's tradition of supporting Palestine at the United Nations shifted. And after Netanyahu visited in 2017, Mexico announced it would abstain on several pro-Palestine resolutions. The use of Israeli technology is even more profoundly embedded in the European Union. The EU is the second largest buyer of Israeli weapons. Israeli so-called smart fence technology is being installed on Europe's land borders to control migration. And we're here in Samos, Greece, just 2 kilometres from Turkey, to see how Israeli surveillance tech is central to the EU's vision for border security. We're meeting Petra Molnar, who is an anthropologist and a global expert on migration and borders.
Good to see you. Hi. Samos, I think, is a really important place to try and understand because it was one of the first camps that was constructed to deal with a mass influx of people who were escaping the Syrian war back in 2015, 2016.
On the hillside just outside the main town of Vathi, the old camp was built for 650 people, but was rapidly overwhelmed with up to 9,000.
It was a bustling city within a city, almost kind of spilling down the hillside like a glass of milk into the city of Vathi there.
People had to build their own ramshackle tents, and there were reports of rape and violence.
I mean, obviously the conditions were horrific, but it had a bit of like a community feeling to it. People were surviving. There was a school. People would cook and spend time together. As we kept getting more and more people on the island, the authorities decided that something had to be done to this camp.
And therefore they obviously decided they want to build something more high-tech and bigger.
Yeah, that's right, with money from the European Union. And Samos was the first camp like this that was constructed. It's just over the hill there, and it is very, very different from this one.
In 2021, thousands of refugees were moved to the new Closed Control Access Centre, or CCAC.
Much better living conditions, but at the same time increased security provisions for the benefit of asylum seekers, of the benefit of the staff, and of the benefit of the local communities.
This CCAC is up a hill, 8 kilometres from the town.
What really strikes you first, like it's a massive block of concrete. It's sun-baked, it's so hot, it's just, there's very little vegetation inside the camp, and also so much surveillance. When we went in for the official opening, we were able to go inside the containers where people are living, and there are cameras in the corridors. There's also cameras on some of the taller poles. People have reported drone usage, and where this data is going and who it's being shared with is not exactly clear.
So what is it like to live there? Ruli came from Syria and was moved from the old camp to the CCAC.
You see the wires, the cameras, the security guard, the police, like, where am I? I am in Guantanamo now. Sometimes I was exiting my container to take a fresh air. Like, I cannot be in this box. You look here, like there is a camera. You look there, like there is a camera. You turn like this, there is a camera. And then beside that, like everywhere there are police officer, security guard, you're controlled. Your life, it's under control 24/7. You feel like everyone like is staring at you. Like as you are like the most dangerous person in the world.
I want to know what all this surveillance is for, so I'm meeting an NGO that provides legal support to asylum seekers.
When people are registered in the Closed Control Access Centre, they're required to give their fingerprints multiple times. And part of this is for the asylum procedure, it's for the Eurodac system, that's an EU-wide database of fingerprints of asylum seekers. But it's also for Epirion, this biometric AI technology that the CCAC has in place that's 100% funded by the EU. So they have a biometric card, and when they leave the facility and when they come back in, they have to scan the card and scan their fingerprint to be able to enter and exit. When you look at the Ministry of Migration's website, you can see that they report that there's behavioral or motion recognition analytics that is being used in the Centauro system. To our understanding, it's that there's CCTV cameras and drones, which are then live streamed to a control center in Athens.
This is known as Centaur and controls the Samos CCAC and 4 other similar camps. At the heart of it is a system supplied by Octopus, an Israeli firm whose customers include the Israeli military.
Octopus allows simple management of entire security events from one screen.
And on Samos, we discovered that the behavioural analytics is done by Israeli company Visites, which is supported by the Israeli army and intelligence services.
It goes to these policies of exclusion and technologies of control. I mean, I was in the occupied West Bank last year, and some of the infrastructure that you see there is replicated here. I mean, it is the kind of same thinking that technology can be used to manage people and control people and keep people away that you don't want on your territory.
Key to Europe's efforts to keep people away are the Heron drones Israel uses to surveil Gaza. In 2020, Israel aerospace industry signed a $50 million deal to provide the drones to the EU's border force, Frontex.
Introducing Heron Maritime UAS with a multi-sensor payload tailored to the mission and with 24 hours of endurance.
Known as a fixed-wing drone, the Heron has a range of up to 1,000 kilometres from its base in Malta. Unlike a ship on the sea, a drone has no obligation to rescue vessels in distress. Instead, Frontex passes the location of migrant boats to the Libyan Coast Guard.
The boat capsized during the interception.
The EU pays Libya to intercept migrants, and in just the first 10 months of 2024, over 18,000 people were stopped from reaching Europe.
There's people in the water now.
Yeah.
A lot of people in the water. All of them.
Everybody.
At least 28,000 people have died in the Mediterranean in the last decade. The Greek government and the EU deny that they do pushbacks. What do you think their logic is in doing so?
They want to make the passage into the EU as difficult and as violent as possible so that other people are dissuaded from coming. Because the more technology you have, the bigger your surveillance dragnet is. And people also know that, and so they will take riskier routes to try and avoid that surveillance.
In 2019, the Greek Coast Guard signed a deal with Israeli company Elbit for a full combat suite, enabling patrol boats to control fleets of drones and conduct surveillance far beyond the line of sight. The army acquired an Israeli-made Heron drone for border duty in 2020, and the Coast Guard has had one since 2022. This footage shows the Coast Guard illegally pushing a boat out of Greek waters and into Turkish waters, known as a pushback. It's something Ruli experienced multiple times during his attempts to reach Greece.
They were like hitting us with the iron metal, and they were like destroying the motor and ask us like to throw the oil, the benzene of the motor. That's to not be able to cross after when they leave.
We made contact with someone who works at this high-tech camp, and he doesn't want to be identified, so we have to go out of town to interview him. And we're on the way there now. The whistleblower says that in 2020, Greece adopted a policy to push back 100% of the boats.
So they started pushing every boat back
to Turkish waters.
To Turkish waters.
He says after 2020, almost no one arrived at the camp.
After March 2020, the numbers to Samos were ridiculous. I think it was like 25 people in total. But you cannot have zero arrivals for a whole year. They proved that they can control 100% the arrivals.
That changed in June 2023 when the Greek Coast Guard tried to tow a refugee boat, the Adriana, but instead capsized it, killing nearly 600 people. Suddenly, Greece's border practices were under the spotlight.
They changed their policy. They stopped doing pushbacks.
He says that for Samos, the pause resulted in more people in the camp.
And that's why from 300 people, 400 people that were there, within 2, maximum 3 months, you had 4,000 people in the camp. The reason behind that is because they stopped doing pushbacks.
We've looked at the official data for arrivals and the numbers in the camp, and they broadly support what he's saying. It makes sense that Greece and Israel are very close. They've never been closer. Defence deals, but it's more than that. Both countries sell themselves as a model to how to keep unwanted populations out. We just arrived in Delhi in India, and it is predictably overwhelming. And we know already that India buys more arms off Israel than anyone else, but actually we've come to discover is a relationship more than that. As India overtakes China as the world's most populous country, the government is keen to increase its high technology manufacturing, and this has led to deep ties with Israel. We're on our way to meet some farmers in Punjab state, not that far from Delhi, and the reason we want to do this is that we've discovered that they have been attacked generally this year by drones, and there's a connection with how Israel treats Palestinians. So we want to go and speak to them and understand what happened. This was the response of the authorities to Sikh farmers peacefully protesting at the removal of price protections for their crops. 6 months later, they're still camped out on the motorway in protest. Pushpinder Singh remembers how the police used a tactic new to India, dropping tear gas from drones.
यहाँ पर ड्रोन बम्बिंग कर रहे थे और बच्चों से लेकर बूढ़ों तक सब ने देखा है, यहाँ तक कि एम्बुलेंस पर भी ड्रोन बम्बिंग हुई है। एम्बुलेंस पर मेरी आंखों के सामने बम्बिंग हुई है और पूरी तरह ऐसे हुआ जैसे दुश्मन देश के साथ होता है, जैसे हम किसी और दुश्मन देश के लोग हों, ऐसे हमारे साथ व्यवहार किया गया।
This is one of the farmers' leaders. He shows me the empty canisters, some of which they said had come from the drone.
ये हमले हमारे लोग हमारे ऊपर ड्रोन के माध्यम से बहुत सारे हुए। ड्रोन ऐसे करता रहा।
Interrupted by the monsoon, we go to their makeshift headquarters. That's the drone.
ये ड्रोन
dropping tear gas.
किसी और दूसरे कंट्री के ऊपर उनकी फोर्सेज के ऊपर वो छोड़ना वो लग पाते हैं। इन्होंने तो अपने देश के किसानों के ऊपर वो चलाया गया है, तो इन्होंने सभी हदें पार की हैं इनका।
The police drones were supplied by Drisha, a company owned by the state of Haryana. To find out more, we met the former chief operating officer of Drisha, also a former wing commander in the Indian Air Force. In 2018, Haryana sent a delegation to Israel, politicians and police. Yes. Why did they go there, and what were they hoping to learn from a country that describes itself as a leader in homeland security?
That was the starting point of forming the Drisha. That gives an idea to a state that we should have our own setup.
Haryana's chief minister led the delegation, which visited Israel Aerospace Industries, where they were briefed about innovations in aerospace and defence.
There is no doubt that Israel is far ahead as far as technologies and deep technologies are concerned. So, a lot of learning we have taken from Israel.
At the time of the Indian visit, Palestinians were peacefully protesting on the Gaza border. It was here the Israeli army pioneered the practice of using drones to drop tear gas on protesters. The Israeli army also shot and injured over 36,000 people and killed 200. At the Indian farmers' protest, the Drisha drones were initially being used for surveillance of the farmers, says the wing commander.
Since this being a dual-use technology, so government thought we can use it to control the situation also. But obviously, being a democratic nation, people doesn't like that. But government sometimes have to act tough. That protest was controlled at the cost of resentment by the people.
This is far from the only exchange of ideas and weapons between India and Israel.
I promise to defend you.
In this Bollywood-style song, Israel sings his allegiance to India,
Shield you and support you.
while dancing around the products of Israeli missile manufacturer Rafael. To find out how this relationship came about, I'm meeting defence expert Rahul Bedi.
Hi, lovely to meet you. How are you?
He says things changed when India's previous main weapons supplier, the Soviet Union, collapsed in 1991.
Israel sensed an opportunity. India was a very ready and a very hungry customer.
India is currently the largest purchaser of Israeli weapons, buying nearly 50% of total exports. But it's more than a customer. Under the Make in India policy, the Adani Group and Israeli company Elbit are making a version of the Hermes 900 drone in Hyderabad. Israel Aerospace Industries has set up a joint venture with Bharat Electronics to maintain the IAI-designed medium-range surface-to-air missiles used across India's armed forces. And India has made its space launch capacity available to Israel.
With a surveillance satellite to surveil their borders in Gaza and in the northern territories. They launched another satellite soon after. It was called RISAT, R-I-S-A-T, with the X-ray radar supplied by IAI, Israel Aircraft Industries, which helps India monitor its line of control with Pakistan.
I stand with
Israel.
I stand with
Israel.
I stand with Israel. I love you, Israel. Tum kisko?
After October 7, there was a huge increase in pro-Israel social media posts by right-wing Hindu groups like this.
हम इजराइल को इसलिए समर्थन कर रहे हैं क्योंकि इजराइल खुद आतंकवाद, इस्लामिक आतंकवाद, रेडिकल इस्लामिक आतंकवाद से प्रताड़ित है.
This street-level support enables more establishment Hindu nationalists to go even further, especially around India's disputed territory of Kashmir.
You need an Israel-like solution to Kashmir.
This is a dawn of a new era in the great friendship between India and Israel. I think it heralds a flourishing of our partnership to bring prosperity and peace for both our peoples.
At the offices of the independent news site The Wire are meeting its founding editor. How would you describe the shared values and relationship between Modi, Netanyahu, Israel and India?
The official definition of Israel now is as a homeland for Jews, and Jews are the only authentic Israelis. Israel is a Jewish state. Their counterparts in India envision India as a Hindu state, as a Hindu Rashtra, where Hindus are the only authentic Indians. So I think that's a very important glue that binds the two governments at this stage.
After independence in 1948, India saw itself as a post-colonial leader and was one of the first to recognise Palestine. But that's been shifting since India's been a large customer of Israeli weapons, and in 2024, India abstained on the motion to end the occupation in Palestine.
It's really quite appalling the way in which the current Indian government has reversed India's long-standing support for the people of Palestine, and going back to before India was an independent country.
Far from criticising Israel for its war on Gaza, India's booming defence industry is now exporting explosives, missiles and drones to Israel. So when we came here, we knew that India buys more arms from Israel than anyone else in the world. But actually what we've discovered being here is that really there's a cultural affinity between India and Israel, which is kind of about racial supremacy. Both nations admire each other's racism. But before India, Israel had an even murkier brush with racial supremacy. I've come to South Africa to see what extent Israel helped support the apartheid regime here. So we're in Cape Town, South Africa, and first we're at the richest, poshest part of the city to see this incredible wealth. It's no accident that Sea Point remains one of the wealthiest areas in South Africa. Under apartheid, only white people were able to live here. Instituted in 1948, the apartheid policy was a form of racial discrimination that saw whites, coloureds and blacks living under different legal and economic systems. Non-white people were forcibly moved from the city and put into townships, where many still live today. So just on the way to a township on the outskirts of Cape Town, where we're going to see the reality of what apartheid was like. And we're going to meet up with a woman called Henrietta, who was campaigning against it for years. There are townships on either side of this highway, established during apartheid to provide labour for the factories a bit further down. This is the outskirts of Langa, the Black Township. Even now, it's dominated by informal settlements built by people who can't find any other housing. It's just so shocking and enraging. On the other side of the highway is Bonti-Herville, a township established for coloured people, which included those who were mixed race, Indigenous and of Asian heritage, where I'm meeting Henrietta.
Hello.
Hello. Wow, what a beautiful garden.
I was born in the apartheid system, so for me it was normal. Net blankers, whites only, Europeans only. It was ingrained in you that this is not for you. These are for white people. And something like a train, you could see the different standard. We would sit on hard wooden benches in the train and they would have cushy seats.
How was apartheid enforced exactly?
The police and the army during the 80s, they felt that they had to be present. Like they were stationed at our schools. It was nothing for them to march up and down our corridors. Or if they wasn't stationed there, they were doing the rounds on our streets. So they were everywhere.
Apartheid was resisted from the beginning, but by the 1980s, the African National Congress and other groups were organising mass protests. Henrietta was one of the activists.
This is what's called Freedom Square.
Yeah.
We would sit waiting on news, waiting on who's been arrested, waiting on what is the next plan. We had a running battle here with the police, for instance. The police would come there, we would throw stones, go whatever. Then I would quickly run. I would go and grab a grandchild in a pram and come back and watch the police as if I did nothing.
Or pretend that you were the mother?
Yes.
Right, okay.
Yes.
Whatever you need to do, right?
Yes.
Despite these efforts, Henrietta was arrested 14 times by the police, who routinely beat political organisers.
I had comrades of mine who was tied to beds. They would put things up their rectums. Males whose genitals was banged into filing drawers. Women been taken by their hair, thrown from one wall to the other, to the other.
Internationally, there was a growing movement of boycott, divestment and sanctions against apartheid. By the 1980s, South Africa was economically and culturally isolated. Only a few countries, including the UK and US, offered the regime any support.
To add to those economic sanctions wouldn't help negotiations. It would only make things worse.
But South Africa had another secure partner throughout this period of isolation: Israel. I'm meeting an investigator of economic crimes and human rights violations.
We've got a range of documents here that come from different archives that tell different parts of the story, I suppose, of the South African-Israel relationship kind of at the height of apartheid. Okay. This is from 1976. They really need stuff quite desperately, so they've purchased 6 130mm ammunition systems from Israel for 2.7 million rand. Israel in general was a huge supplier of ammunition to the apartheid state. An additional option has been obtained for the purchase of 14,000 white phosphorus shells.
From the mid-1970s, South Africa was at war trying to topple the left-wing government of the newly independent Angola. In 1976, South African Prime Minister John Vorster visited Israel amid speculation the countries were working on an arms deal.
If you look at the amount of weapons being bought, around $1 billion from the 70s into the 80s by the apartheid state, that's an incredible inflow of money into the Israeli economy just when they need it. And so just from a demand perspective, it's an important relationship. But then, of course, there's the secondary benefit to both states, which is the kind of co-creation of weapons technology. So there's a flow of funds happening, but there's also a flow of expertise that the apartheid state is able to use Israeli tech to build their weapons technology.
Israel also supplied equipment used to repress the anti-apartheid movement, including water cannons made by an Israeli kibbutz. But the relationship went deeper than just weapons.
This is from Milan to the Chief of General Staff for the Israeli Defense Force. And I think this is the telling line. It is comforting to know that South Africa does not stand alone in facing criticism from the international community. Our respective countries will have to withstand this in all its many manifestations, and we keep up our determination. And this is an example, but you see it in other places, of the South Africans and the Israeli officials writing to each other with that kind of mutual understanding of we're under siege, we're under attack, no one understands us, but you do.
These two countries also worked together on the development of their nuclear weapons. South Africa supplied Israel with uranium in the 1960s, and they exchanged technology.
Towards the mid to the late 1980s, when South Africa have essentially developed nuclear weapons capacity, we know that there are high-level discussions between the Israelis and the South Africans about missile technology and developing kind of mid to long-range missiles that could carry a nuclear load.
South Africa gave up its nuclear weapons along with apartheid in the 1990s. But by then, the army and security services were dependent on Israeli security tech and have remained so in many sectors, including with water cannons. It's perhaps not a surprise then that it's a post-apartheid government that's mounting the most serious challenge to Israel's war in Gaza.
In keeping with our obligation as a state party to the Genocide Convention, our government has approached the International Court of Justice to prevent the unfolding genocide in Gaza.
What we've uncovered and detailed is the huge and close links between Israel and apartheid South Africa for decades. And I think it tells us a lot about how Israel is willing to use its technology not only to survive, but to support other regimes that agree with its vision of racial supremacy. I've come back to Israel to try to understand where this idea comes from. This is one of the regular protests calling on the government to bring the hostages home from Gaza. There are hundreds of thousands of people that way, hundreds of thousands of people that way, a sea of Israeli flags, and there's a stage over there where some family members of hostages are speaking and demanding the government makes a deal with Hamas to free the hostages. I want to hear how people are thinking about the war on Gaza.
At the beginning, I was like, I don't care from the other side.
Yeah.
They brought it on themselves.
Yes.
But now when we know, when we understand, we want the killing to stop.
And your solution to that is it to end the war, or is it to make a deal?
To make a deal, to end the war, bring all of them back home, save lives of of them, of our soldiers, of the people on the other side.
You mean Palestinians?
They also have innocent people.
A lot of people in Israel, even in the left, center left, actually don't give a damn about Palestinian life in Gaza, in the West Bank. And this is part of the problem, because people here are fighting for democracy, but actually they're fighting for democracy for the Jew, for the Israeli, not even for the Palestinian who live in Israel.
To find out why this is, I'm meeting outspoken journalist Gideon Levy. He puts it down to what he calls the Israeli mindset.
Most of the Israelis, including the secular ones, if you scratch under the skin, you will see they truly believe that we are the chosen people. And being the chosen people means that we have privileges. It means that nobody can tell us what to do.
And it's becoming clear that Israel sees what happened on October the 7th as justification not only to destroy Gaza, but to resettle it.
The only way to prevent that from happening again is to return the entire strip to Jewish sovereignty, to be an integral part of the land, which it was always meant to be. It's the only real way to bring peace.
No one's really sanctioning Israel for arms or really anything. How does it get away with it?
Israel developed a very sophisticated strategy, namely, any criticism about Israel is anti-Semitism. I don't think there is one state in the world who has the same freedom to do whatever it wants, without legal limits, without moral limits, without any international limits. I don't think there is one state in the world that not only ignores endless resolution of the international community, but is also the darling of the West.
On this global journey, one of the things that really has struck me is how ubiquitous Israeli surveillance tech is, border tech, but not just equipment actually, it's ideology. Because in some ways what I'm investigating is not just the Israeli arms industry, which is huge and growing. It's also an idea. This idea that Israel is selling a model, a way to separate and control unwanted populations, minorities, whether it's Muslims or others. So much of the world increasingly is dealing with the climate crisis, growing numbers of refugees, well over 100 million. And as much of the world moves to the right and the far right, they see this country where I am now as that model. And in fact, despite what Israel's doing right here in Gaza, they see that in fact as a reason to copy Israel even more. Because Israel is already selling and promoting and marketing the repressive tech and weapons that they're using in the mass slaughter in Gaza behind me.